Welcome back. I'm Yalda Hakim. Our top story on Impact today: new legal obstacles to President Trump's border policies. A judge in 17 Democratic states challenge his administration's policy of separating families at the border with Mexico. No safe, voluntary or dignified return to Myanmar yet possible for the Rohingya. The UN's latest verdict will bring you more. The desperate search in Thailand for a group of young footballers and their coach missing inside a cave for the past 5 days.
What these soldiers are trying to do is find some evidence of a chimney or a hole that might drop down through the limestone rocks into the caves below.
And the battle for a place in the last 16 at the World Cup.
I'm Regina Vaidyanathan, live in Moscow. Kick-off in the first of today's World Cup games is in under an hour. We'll bring you full coverage throughout the day.
We start this edition of Impact in the United States. It's a policy that has drawn widespread condemnation from many in America and across the globe: the separation of migrant families at the U.S. border with Mexico. Last week, President Trump issued an executive order promising to keep families together in migrant detention centers. But the order does not specify when and how those already split up will be brought back together. Now, Democratic attorneys general from 17 states are launching a lawsuit to challenge the policy. And a federal judge in California has ordered that migrant children must be reunited with their families within 30 days. Children who are under 5 years old must be reunited within 14 days. Now, these are the views of some people at a protest in Los Angeles. Have a listen.
They should immediately put all efforts to reconnect these children with their parents. They should immediately provide legal services, lawyers in the detention centers ASAP.
I suggest that government enforce the laws of immigration so we could keep our country intact. And I understand the passion here about people, because it's all about people, and that's where I stand, about people. But we need to protect laws, in order to keep order, and we need to make the law better, because right now the law is not good.
Well, they were the views from LA. Earlier, I asked CBS reporter Laura Podesta about the lawsuit, which is the first challenge to family separations.
This is a win for the American Civil Liberties Union, which is pressing charges against the administration in order to reunite these families at the border. And this is the U.S.-Mexico border that we're talking about.
Because there's still, as we know, 2,300 children who were separated, and parents still remain detained.
That's absolutely correct. So this is an issue that's a timely issue, one where we have families we've seen when they are finally reunited, there are tears, there are hugs. So this is an emotional situation with lots of demonstrators, protesters outside of the courthouses saying that dreamers make America great, that we have to oust GOP Trump enablers. So this has also become a very politicized situation at the border. And again, a real win for the ACLU to know that these children and their parents must be reunited within that certain time frame, depending on the age of the children. And this comes just as yesterday the Supreme Court ruled to uphold President Trump's travel ban. So a contrast there. And yesterday we saw protesters too gathering across the U.S. demonstrating against that decision. Politicians on both sides of the aisle speaking out. Republican Senator Ted Cruz said that federal immigration law explicitly gives the president the authority to make a determination in the national interest to keep us safe. Democrats, on the other hand, say the Supreme Court is essentially endorsing Islamophobia because 5 of the 7 countries on that travel ban list, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen, have overwhelmingly Muslim populations. So these two conflicting immigration situations happening in the U.S. right now, one in which it seems as though the more liberal view is being favored with these families being able to be reunited at the U.S.-Mexico border, and then in contrast, the Supreme Court upholding President Trump's travel ban and not allowing residents from those overwhelmingly Muslim-populated countries to come in.
That was CBS reporter Laura Podesta speaking to me a little earlier. Now to the rest of the day's news. A charity ship that has been stranded for 5 days with 230 migrants on board has been given permission to dock on the Mediterranean island of Malta. The Lifeline boat picked up the migrants off the Libyan coast on Thursday, but was blocked from Italian ports. Malta's Prime Minister Joseph Muscat says some of the migrants will stay in Malta, others will go to 5 other European countries. Well, our correspondent James Reynolds has the latest from the Maltese capital, Valletta.
It is expected to dock sometime here, someplace here in Malta. I'm in the capital, Valletta, at the moment, and we're trying to work out still which port it will dock in. But the Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat, at a press conference held here in his office, explained that actually 7 EU countries will share out the redistribution of some of the migrants on board. And that really, to Malta, was one of the key points. For days, it didn't want to have to take in the ship and its more than 200 migrant passengers if Malta was to be left to deal with them on its own. It wanted the EU to help out, and now it looks like there's been this informal agreement by which the 6 other states have agreed to take in some migrants. But if you stand back and look at the agreement, you'll see that they're all from Western and Southern Europe. There are none of those states from Central and Eastern Europe who have suggested in recent days that they don't want to take much part in the redistribution of migrants. Expect to see that problem emerge at the summit of EU leaders in the next few days.
James Reynolds reporting there from Valletta. Now, Amnesty International has published what it calls detailed new evidence of the extent of the Burmese military's crimes against the Rohingya people in Myanmar. It comes as UN investigators call for concrete action from the international community in the face of such serious violations. Now, you'll remember around 700,000 fled to Bangladesh last autumn when the military launched a brutal security operation in Rakhine State following a series of ambushes by Rohingya militants on police posts. Here's our Myanmar correspondent Nick Beek.
A village burns in western Myanmar. This was last September when Burmese army and Buddhist mobs were attacking Rohingya Muslim communities. Now Amnesty International says it's gathered detailed evidence proving the military's offensive in Rakhine State had been weeks in the planning. The Myanmar Army's Commander-in-Chief, Min Aung Hlaing, is one of 13 top officers named in the report. They're accused of orchestrating rape and murder and driving out more than 500,000 Rohingya people. The military, which still holds huge power here, has always claimed it was responding to attacks on the police by Rohingya insurgents and rejects accusations of ethnic cleansing. But the stories of those who made it across the border to Bangladesh and now live in the world's biggest refugee camp tell another story. The International Criminal Court is looking at whether Myanmar can be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. So far, Myanmar's refused to cooperate, and Aung San Suu Kyi's government insists a new Burmese-led investigation is the best way to uncover the truth. Nick Beek, BBC News, Yangon.
OK, let's cross live now to Geneva and speak to our correspondent Imogen Folks. Imogen, criticism again by the UN towards the authorities in Myanmar.
That's right. The United Nations has what's called a special rapporteur, an expert on Myanmar looking at human rights in the country. She has already delivered a number of reports, very forensic examination of what's been happening, particularly in Rakhine State. Today, she didn't mince her words. She said that nothing had improved since this time last year, that discrimination and hatred continued against religious and ethnic minorities. And she said that the government in charge in Myanmar was responsible and was doing nothing whatsoever to bring people, primarily in the military, to justice for apparent war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Imogen, is there a realization within the UN that these reports are falling on deaf ears?
Well, I think certainly this morning at the UN Human Rights Council, Yang Hee Lee, who is the special rapporteur, she couldn't really hide her impatience. And what she basically said was, look, I'm not getting a dialogue. You're not allowing me into Myanmar. I have to compile my reports based on victims' accounts, the people in Bangladesh now, on satellite imagery. So what we need, because she clearly believes major violations have taken place, what she wants now is a very formal, it's called an accountability mechanism, UN speak, but what it means is a formal body that will gather evidence which will then go to the International Criminal Court for possible prosecutions.
Imogen, thanks so much for the latest there from Geneva. Now to other stories making headlines here on Impact. A US-based monitor claims that satellite images show North Korea is rapidly improving a key nuclear research facility despite the country declaring a commitment to denuclearize. Images show the construction of new buildings at a site in Yongbyon, north of the capital, Pyongyang. Russian President Vladimir Putin has met with Donald Trump's national security advisor John Bolton and says he hopes the visit will help to revive bilateral ties and tensions between Moscow and the West. Poland's government is to water down legislation on the Holocaust that had sparked a heated row with Israel. The decision comes as former inmates of the Auschwitz death camp laid wreaths to remember those who were imprisoned and killed during the Second World War. Poland had originally made it a criminal offence to imply that the Polish state was complicit in the Holocaust. An Australian court has ordered actress Rebel Wilson to pay back $3 million, the majority of her record defamation payment from magazine publisher Bauer Media. Wilson had received $3.5 million in damages over articles that she said portrayed her as a serial liar, but a court reduced the sum earlier this month following an appeal. Now let's go to Thailand. The rescue team searching for a group of children and their football coach who are trapped in a cave system, have been forced to try a new approach after floodwaters made it possible to go through the main entrance. They've been searching for a way down in remote jungle. Our correspondent Jonathan Head went with them and has sent us this report.
Well, this is the base from which they're sending out a number of teams to search in the hills that are around here, hoping to find a chimney that will lead down into the caves below. That's the only way at the moment they think they can find these boys. They still don't know exactly where they are. Over here you can see these rescue workers. They've been waiting. These are equipped climbers, people with experience of cliff and cave climbing. There are already teams who've gone to other locations. They're waiting for news of a possible chimney. Now if you look at the map there, they've been looking all over this area for suitable geology, looking for places where they need to search. But these rescue workers have to wait for the soldiers to come back with news. And so far, despite 2 days of searching, no one has yet found a suitable chimney, something that gives them the prospect of making an expedition down to see if they can find those boys. So this is very exploratory at the moment. Nobody knows when any of this will bear any fruit. Well, we've been walking for about half an hour now into the forests in these very steep hills. What these soldiers are trying to do is find some evidence of a chimney or a hole that might drop down through the limestone rocks into the caves below. All they've got to go on is local hearsay. People around here who may have spotted a hole at some point. The locations are not very precise, and we've got at least a dozen troops of soldiers fanning out across really tough terrain like this, desperate to find some way into these caves, because going through the entrance with all the water as high as it is right now is just not an option for them. They say they've got to explore. The governor of this province has told everybody working on this search and rescue to imagine that those 12 boys are their own sons. It's that big a story here. Everybody is rooting for good news. We haven't had it. These soldiers are just part of an enormous effort to find some way to reach them.
Jonathan Head there in northern Thailand. Stay with us here on Impact. Still to come.
I'm live in Moscow ahead of another day of World Cup action with Brazil and Germany, just some of the teams playing.
Hello again, I'm Yalda Hakim. You're watching Impact from the BBC. And of course, in 15 minutes' time, we'll have Talking Business with Mariam. Mariam, what's coming up on the show?
Plenty of news on the show. First of all, we'll be talking about the US and its attitude towards technology firms and how they deal with foreign businesses. The House of Representatives passed a law dealing with technology and the way that foreign firms invest in US companies. We'll be looking at that. Also, we'll be looking at Facebook. It tried through drone technology to get into bringing people internet through drones. It was basically plans to create drones that beam down internet connectivity. These plans have basically failed, and we're going to be looking at that tech and why exactly they failed. And finally, the World Cup is on, Yalda. What's your favourite kind of snack to eat when you're watching World Cup matches? I know you're a big football fan.
Well, no, I've been watching some of the games, actually. I mean, I might eat chocolate and a cup of tea. Yeah.
Popcorn.
Popcorn.
So in China, apparently, the latest thing is duck neck.
Really?
Deep fried with a can of beer.
That's the latest fad.
Our correspondent has been out and about in China tasting this latest thing. Apparently it tastes really nice. I haven't got any samples here for you.
For us.
But I'm sure it tastes like chicken. Everything does.
Yeah, it does, really. Yeah. Everything does. I look forward to that one, Mariam. Thank you. Now, speaking of the World Cup, 2 more places in the last 16 will be decided today. 2 former champions need to avoid defeat if they're to progress. Of course, our correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan is in Moscow for us. Rajini, over to you.
Yalda, and it's an extremely humid day here in Moscow, and as you can see, I've got St. Basil's Cathedral and the Kremlin behind me, and below, fans are gathering for another big day of matches. 5-time World Cup winners Brazil play Serbia, and in the other Group E match, Switzerland play Costa Rica. In Group F, we have a big test for Germany. They're up against South Korea. And Mexico will also be playing Sweden. And in this group, all 4 nations have a shot at qualifying. So there's a lot riding on all of today's matches, not least for the defending champions, Germany. Our correspondent Alex Capstick is in Kazan, where the Germans will be taking on South Korea.
Germany's quest to retain their title is still alive thanks to that dramatic comeback against Sweden. It was a far from perfect performance, more about their mental strength, their determination, and they'll hope it provides momentum, a springboard for improvement as they progress through the tournament. One of their biggest problems has been a vulnerability to the counter-attack. It was exploited by Sweden and especially Mexico, and today they'll be without one of their key defenders, Jerome Boateng, who got a red card against Sweden and is therefore suspended. As for South Korea, they've lost their opening games, but they still have a chance of qualifying for the knockout stage. They'll have to improve, though. They were poor against Mexico and Sweden, but they know, however unlikely, a convincing victory against Germany could be enough to see them through. But while it's not been straightforward for Germany here in Russia, it would still be a major surprise if they fail to qualify for the knockout stage.
A major surprise, as Alex says there, but who knows what will happen in this tournament. They're always unpredictable. Now, to discuss today's matches and more, I'm joined by Andrew Duff from the New York Times, who's here covering this tournament. Good to have you with us, Andrew. Let's start with today's matches. Big day for Germany and Brazil, previous holders. A lot at stake for both those teams.
For sure, for sure. Germany kind of saved itself on Saturday night at the last moment. It was a terrific game. They're still looking up at Mexico, though, which is a big story for us in America. That is our second team, I guess, this summer. And Brazil appears to have righted its ship as well, so they hope to get some momentum tonight.
And any other possible teams that we should be watching today? Maybe Serbia or another team that could maybe make it through?
Well, the Serbs and the Swiss are fighting behind Brazil. The right kind of results could scramble that quite nicely for everybody. And we had a little of that with Spain and Portugal the other night. Little drama is good for all of us.
A lot of drama so far, and a lot of that drama has actually been generated by the introduction of VAR in this tournament. A lot of people saying it's a bad thing, others saying it's a good thing.
I think, I personally, we're a little more familiar with it in the United States. The professional league in the United States, Major League Soccer, has had it for almost a year now. People are much more comfortable with it. I think the newness of it is throwing some people who aren't familiar with it. If calls don't go their way, of course they're angry and they think we should take another look. That's not what VAR is designed to do.
You say it's being used in the States at the moment. What lessons do you think the Russians can learn from how it's being used in Major League Soccer?
Well, not just the Russians, but the entire world. But Major League Soccer kind of worked out some of the kinks that we're seeing now. When do you use it? When don't you use it? What's it for? And I think once people come to understand that VAR is a tool to correct massive blunders, to save referees from huge game-changing mistakes, and once you limit the scope to that, I think you have a better grasp of it. It can't just be, well, I thought that was a penalty or I thought that was a foul, because that's when the game starts to come apart, and you just can't do that.
Now, Andrew, as we approach the final 16, I'm going to start asking all journalists that I interview this question, but who are you putting your money on this tournament?
You know, I like France coming in. I know it was a little unfashionable. I liked Brazil just because it felt almost like Brazil's cycle comes and goes, and it felt like maybe as an unfavored choice that they might sneak in a little bit. I think some of the big favorites have disappointed, and that maybe validates a little of what I was thinking, but I don't like to predict. We root for good stories at the New York Times.
Andrew, you didn't mention England, which is rather disappointing, and of course they are in action tomorrow, and of course I'd be amiss if I didn't say that they were my team.
Regini, thanks so much. And of course there'll be more from the World Cup in our sports news, and to keep up to date with what's going on, go to the BBC Sport website. Everything you need to know is there. Team news, interviews, results and fixtures building up to the final on July the 15th. Go to the usual place, bbc.com/World Cup. Now, Prince William has crossed into the Israeli-occupied West Bank to meet the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah. The first British royal to visit Israel and the Palestinian territory spoke of Britain's record of working closely with the Palestinians in education and relief work. He also expressed hope for lasting peace in the region. Wednesday's meeting with Mr. Abbas comes after the Prince spent Tuesday on a tour of Israel, where he met the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's go to Malaysia now, where police say the value of items seized from 6 residences linked to the former Prime Minister Najib Razak and his wife amount to about $270 million. The two are under investigation in what is thought to be the biggest haul of goods found in Malaysian history. From Singapore, Karishma Vaswani has more, and just a warning that this report contains some flash photography.
12,000 pieces of jewellery, including 14 tiaras, Hermes, Prada, Chanel, Judith Leiber, amongst the 567 luxury handbags from 37 different brands, and 423 watches made up of more than 100 brands, including Rolex and Chopard. All of these items were found in residences linked to Malaysia's former Prime Minister Najib Razak and his wife.
So the total cost of all the items, the retail price will be touching 910 to 1.1 billion ringgit. That's the total value of the items seized.
That's around $270 million, a figure that has left many in Malaysia in disbelief.
Definitely will be. I think this is the biggest seizure in Malaysian history. Biggest seizure.
Police say they don't know who all the loot belongs to, but that they will be questioning Mr. Najib and his wife soon. The former Prime Minister is under investigation as part of a probe into what happened to the state-run investment fund One Malaysia Development Berhad, also known as 1MDB. The fund was initially set up to develop the Malaysian capital Kuala Lumpur into a financial hub, but that never happened. Instead, the fund's debt ballooned, and there were massive allegations of fraud and misconduct, including by the US Department of Justice, which alleges $3.5 billion was misappropriated from 1MDB. Mr. Najib was accused of receiving $700 million of that money, but has strongly denied all wrongdoing. But since losing a general election in May to his former mentor Mahathir Mohamad, Mr. Najib has been barred from leaving the country and has been the focus of investigations. Rising anger over the cost of living and a sense of injustice that many ordinary Malaysians felt over the 1MDB corruption scandal are thought to be key reasons why Mr. Najib lost the election. The current government has promised to punish all of those involved, even if it means bringing charges against the former leader. Karishma Vaswani, BBC News, Singapore.
OK, we'll be back on Impact in about 30 minutes' time. Mariam's coming up with Talking Business, but of course you can get in touch on Twitter in the meantime and at BBC Yalda Hakim. See you shortly.